record button.
It's
See,
just recording right now.
It's always recording, but because we all get a veto on what we don't want to in the final cut, so
We're not going to be left with much if we all get a veto.
The idea of this roundtable started with me and Harding chatting up about a bunch of discussions all of us have had in person with different designers among us, and the kind of things that the people, the real deal, the real talk, people don't talk about. Of course, like it's a tricky trajectory to walk on. Sometimes we'll be walking on eggshells, but yeah, it's important to talk about the real deal. Right. So that is the heart and intent of this. And today we are talking about growth path as a designer when you just jump into the field. What happens, right? What are the options? How do you start? What are the options in terms of career options, companies? And as you grow, how do you grow? What does it take? What options will you get in the future? What will it mean for your career going forward? So yeah, let's get started. So first thing is obviously about starting out, and what we'll do is we will go in a circle, and we can decide the sequence, probably alphabetical order, and answer this, like start answering question, and then the conversation can take whatever direction it may take. So the first question is what we wish we knew when we were starting out. So let's start with A. People with A. So Abhinav, Arjun, which one comes first? A, B. So let's start with you. Yeah.
What I wish I knew when starting out was, I would say that I don't really think of it that way, in the sense that the things that I wanted to know back then, I probably already knew it but wasn't listening to. And it's like some of those things would be, for example, like the very specific thing, which is I would follow designers and I would get really pissed off when they would talk about stuff that wasn't related to design. And I was just like, dude, can you guys just talk about making apps, making websites? Like, what is this other stuff that you guys are talking about, right? I just got started. But now I find myself doing the exact same thing, which is the actual pixels are not that interesting, or are interesting only when that's your whole scope of knowledge. But over time, it's like you start figuring that these layers exist, and you're just like peeling the onion, and you're like, wait, like I never thought of that part. I didn't think of that part. So I think the one big challenge, one thing that I wish I knew was there's a lot of depth to it. And then I don't think I really needed to know it because I did figure it out over time. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome. Let's move to Arjun.
I think, honestly, the one thing I wish I was told, I went to a design college, and basically the whole setup over there kind of wanted us to think a certain way and like hone our thought process and outlook towards things a certain way. But then what I realized after coming and to the industry and started, being part of the process of building things, that's when I realized that, you have to leverage the best of who you are as a person. You have to really play to your strengths. So that's something I wish I had known earlier, as opposed to sitting and working on new skill sets, etc. I thought it took me some time to understand that I should, build on skills which I would eventually be able to capitalize and leverage on as a person, as, bringing myself as a personality within it. And that has been like a big takeaway, like over the last few years, especially for me, right?
Awesome. Makes sense. Who's next? Madhu, it's you.
Hey,
oh shit. I think I'm...
That's A to Z's are all over the place.
Illiterate.
That has been through a lot. Okay, let's cut him some slack. Okay.
Yeah, he's like brave too much now over the last.
Yeah, one of the things that I, in the hindsight, I wish I knew was that you cannot make an idea great in isolation, right? The only other variable that you need to think about is timing. And if the timing is not great, no matter how good the idea is, it will not work. So I always used to basically internalize it in a bad way, right? Like, hey, why did a certain idea not work? But sometimes the timing as a variable is not in your control, not in even a collective's control. For example, not even in the company's control, because timing also means like the market conditions and things like that. So many great ideas we see circling back and now working that didn't used to work before is because of basically that variable, right? I wish I knew earlier. I would have probably not tried so hard on a few things that I actually spent a lot of time on.
Wow, makes sense. Madhuri, what was your
I actually have 2 points. One is I wish I learned about compounding way earlier than I, just realized, because compounding was an important aspect we all think we know, but it just dawns upon you one day that I wish I had compounded this better. Any skill, it doesn't matter. Like even if it's just reading or, doing anything. And the second thing along with compounding was understanding the fact that my time was very limited in every aspect of life. Like I used to think that, oh, this design would live forever. There's no iteration. We all have that initial idea that starts out. But then over a period of time, I realized that, okay, this is not going to happen. It has to be iterated. It has to move forward. And the time of the cycle of the whole thing has to keep reducing so that we move much forward very quickly. And that was quite a realization for me. And it has changed the way I think completely in this past few years for me.
Sure. I think coming to me, for me, I think what I wish I knew when I was starting out is that the imposter syndrome, and in combination with the emotional vulnerability of being a designer, constantly stays. It never really. You think you've grown the thick skin. You think you have come across where you can objectively take feedback, but it's a constant process. It never. At least for me, it never really, got over. There's still layers to undo, and there's still a lot of work pending there. So design is emotional labor, I guess. That's what I wish I knew coming in. That it's just not that plain and simple. It is emotional labor for various reasons.
I read like a few days ago somewhere where somebody mentioned about that exact emotional labor part of being a designer, right? Like we take so much of our work back with us when we go back home, compared to, let's say, an engineer or like a product manager who would probably not even be thinking about things. And this is why like the emotional highs and lows that we live through, even within a single day or within a single hour sometimes, is just basically we bringing that upon ourselves. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just the personality of the nature of work, right? Like it's something that comes with the kind of work that we produce, which is highly visible, which is something that people have immediate reactions to. That is something that is super hard to like live with, or make peace with, right? Like how do you, the highs and lows are like this. How do you bring them much more closer to like a state of basically peace, right? Like, hey, I mean, if you have a high that basically almost certainly means that a low is coming. If not today, maybe tomorrow. But if you have a low, you also have a high coming, right? So that was something that was hard to. It took its time.
I don't think that's necessarily specific to just design as well. Like I think it probably applies to product managers and developers as well. Like,
anyone who's involved in the building process, I guess.
Exactly. Because like sometimes when I'm doing development type of work, right? Like I'll be sleeping at night and I'll be still thinking about how Webflow, how I would move this here and there. And I'm just like, wait, I need to shut off my brain and go to sleep.
Right.
And it happens at so many different levels. It's like the actual building level and then how it will be perceived. And then, there's layers to it.
I think
that's the connection with problem solving, right? We want to solve this problem from all angles possible. So you just be thinking about it like from all angles, like how am I solving this? Am I doing it right? Am I breaking it somewhere? Am I like, just going round and round about until you feel that gut check that yes, this is the right solution that should go forward. I think that's the process we all go through, and that highs and lows are important to be reduced. Otherwise, we're going to keep the vicious cycle is going to keep going on. Yeah.
Right. I think there's an interesting part in there that you touched upon, Hadi, that I think I feel especially which is that unlike engineers and product managers, our work is more public. Like people don't have opinion, like random people on the street don't have an opinion about what kind of code you wrote or. I
would make one correction. Our work is not public because it's way more visible. Actually, it would be way more public if it was not visible and if people didn't have immediate reactions to. Because people have immediate reactions to, we are also less open to like sharing it publicly. I mean, nitpicking, but yes.
No, that's true. That's true. I think that is one important emotional labor as well. It's like I think filmmakers also face that in a sense. Like actors, like every person on the street has an opinion about their acting skills, or even sports, right? Like I'm sure like Hardik's Twitter feed does get occupied when the certain cricketer is not performing well enough. So I think not knowingly, our work makes us a public person, like unlike other fields.
And I think design, it's also like design is like the first line of defense when you use a product, right? Like the first thing you're going to see is not the loading time, for example, that is maybe because of the dev, or like, for example, let's say delivery time, which is like a real world this thing. You would probably see the first thing, which is the screen.
Yeah.
And that like informs your perceptions, that informs how you're going to feel throughout the rest of the interaction with the product.
I've actually seen some people use that as a very, very valid argument. So I was in a meeting where a designer literally looked to their development team and the product manager and said, listen, tomorrow when there's a bad tweet about what we ship, no one's going to say this is so badly product managed or this is so badly designed. They're going to say this is so badly designed. So I am the main stakeholder here. Like that was the point that designer was trying to make.
Wow, I think that is a legit point. I mean, you can't deny it.
So we are like what Abhinav said is totally true, right? We are at the first line of defense in that way.
It's funny you mentioned movie and filmmakers, right? I think any profession that is creative, right? If creativity in the service of art or creativity in service of solving a problem, that has multiple solutions in any given space, right? Like many approaches are possible, and that is where all the opinions start rolling in. That is why people have this reaction to the work that you put out, right? Like, hey, I would not have done it this way. I would have done it some other way, which is why, according to me, your work basically has this delta, and I'm going to voice it in terms of a harsh or a soft feedback. And the thing is, with an engineer's work, it's harder to like estimate that delta, because many times the barrier to entry with the level of expertise required to judge the work is very different. I would not call it hard or difficult or easy. It's different. And hence people cannot provide as reactive feedback, as much of a reactive feedback to their work as they can do to our work, right? Just like how the kind of reaction we have to a film, as you described, right? Like it's like, yeah, that's bad acting or that's good acting, but probably in their mind or in their context or the way they understood the script, it's probably the right way to approach the character, right?
Right. That makes sense. Coming back to our topic of starting out, another interesting question is like, what excites us today and the next 5 years as designers, right? Come from different backgrounds. Like, let's start like talking about what excites you. Like, what is upcoming that will excite you?
I think for me, I'm sort of closing a particular circle that started in college for me, which is I did computer science. One of the main reasons I did it was because I had watched The Social Network, and I was like, fuck it, let's build an app. Let's build something which is going to be the next big thing.
Right.
Then in college, my realization was that programming is one part of it, but then actually deciding what to build, that is design. So that's when I sort of got into design. And now I've reached a point where I'm getting back into programming, not because I intended to, but because the tools are so much better. So something like Webflow, for example, has let me make end-to-end products, which includes front-end, back-end, as well as the design, right? So what I'm actually really interested about now is how many designers are actually going to just go full stack, right? Because we've always faced the situation where we can come up with really good ideas, but then we need to depend on somebody else to bring it out into the world, right? So you have this crazy idea, but then let's say the developer who you're friends with is just sitting on that idea for 3 weeks. You're probably going to lose steam as a result. But now that tooling is so much better, now that you don't actually need to be a hardcore developer, you can actually just do it with Webflow. I want to see how far that gets pushed. And then I think that might just change what it means to be a designer, which is not just doing one part of the whole product, but maybe just the whole product itself. Yeah.
Very interesting take.
Every added head to the idea basically dilutes the idea, or I would probably say pollutes the idea, unless you're Apple, right? Unless you're basically made to follow the directive.
Right. What do you think, Arjun? You look very confused.
Actually, when Abhinav was talking, all I could think of was, why did I not meet this man like 2-3 years ago, right? Because my trajectory has actually been a little different because I understood that I had to get out of my shell and like stop working in a silo and actually start, collaborating way more often. Because for me, the first taste of actually seeing a lot of people come together and build a product, that happened fairly recently, like 3 years ago, right? Before that, it was all about like sitting in one place and just shipping out a lot of materials. So for me, my dependence on this outward spectrum of non-designers, people from business and product management and developers and engineering, that has actually increased. My dependency on them has increased purely for insight and like knowledge, right? But yeah, like the world of tooling is something I still don't like. I'm glad that I got this opportunity to kind of develop this worldview with these people around me. And now, like tomorrow, I can still like say, you know what? Now I have these insights. This is what I take from these experiences, and I can actually go back to relying on these tools, because that's what I used to do earlier. But then I had I had a lack of tools and I had a lack of insights. But now, coupling what Abhinav actually said would just, I mean, I'm excited for what lies ahead in the next 5 years, because now we are way more aware about our dependency on people, right? We're also seeing way more opportunity, and also the kind of things we're building now. People are growing with your product, right? It's not just like the products are versioned. People are themselves getting exposed to better products all the time. So the benchmark is much higher, and everything else is going to just start, playing catch up. So that's what's exciting me over the next 5 years, I guess.
Awesome. Hardik, what is your take on that? Like,
yeah, I think for me personally, I would love for designers and our field to actually start thinking about real world problems as well, and get out of the screens, right? And now that we are sort of reaching peak smartphone and like peak digital products, I love the companies that are actually doing things outside of the screens, right? Like for example, Zerodha is like disrupting all the finance market, right? Like sure, through the means of technology. I would love for more designers to take on like urban planning, or like solving like or even attempting like the traffic problem, and more like sort of design driven thinking to these problems, right? Instead of like sort of leaving it to policymakers. I love the way sort of, I mean, I not to get too political, right? But the whole like digital India movement, and like actually even that kind of a DNA sort of starting to seep into the government is like really is a positive sign that we are opening ourselves up to like technology being a solution, instead of like this thing that everybody sort of needs to protect their population against, right? So yeah, I would love for like more real life physical world change to come in through design, and more startups coming into that space, like logistics and traffic and like yeah.
Madhuri, what's up?
I actually second what Abhinav said, because I genuinely think that designers should be able to execute and sell their idea very well. Because there was always a dependency, like saying that, hey, I'm going to depend on a developer friend, or I'm going to figure out some way to put this prototype out. We would do some version of it, and it would always be lesser because our ideas will always fall short. So I'm so excited for the future where we can replace our product managers and our developers to a certain extent, and say that my idea is minimum viable product, minimum solution fit is done. Now you go ahead and develop into a full-fledged business. You do whatever you want, it's okay. But we have basically clearly conveyed the idea to business. And beyond this, I want to make sure that just designers understand the basics of human beings. Like, we're designing for a human being at the end of the day. If we do not really understand what is their psychology, their behavioral economics, those are the things that I'm really excited for designers to know more about. Not these over the top topics like neuromarketing and all these trends that are coming. actually going deep down into our, as the old thing says, human factors international, go back and just understand those basics so that we design better for that human being. I think if we can fix those gaps, I am super excited for that future.
Right. Awesome. I think instead of talking, all of the things you folks spoke about excite me. And there's a particular reason, and just going back, if we go back to the history a little, designers work closer to architects and engineers, coming from that field, then some of us realize, and sort of that there was a whole wave of coming away from that technical area and getting into art and advertisement and that sort of side dominating the design world, and with design systems literally challenging the idea of, let's say, the creative and wicked problem solving design thinking side. Like, these two compete. The system thinking and design thinking are actually very opposing theories, very, very opposing theories. And we are living in a world where designers can't go like, I'm either or. Like, you literally need both. Need to honor both sides, the rational side and the irrational side of things, understanding the psychology and the economics, understanding the business and how ads are done, or how behaviors change, or how habits are made. And plus, given these new tools, like we spoke about, Abhinav was talking about Webflow, and even the prototyping tools are getting crazier. Like, we are not too far from them being at least having basic structure of database, and launching an app might be possible from there. So I think that is what I'm excited about, that we will be forced to look at both sides and acknowledge both sides of our existence and not alienate ourselves from that, which we've historically done. And B, these tools forcing us to put the real deal. You can't blame the engineer anymore. That is the other side of it. You can't blame the product manager anymore. Like, of course,
I can and I will. I'm sorry.
Now you can.
Edit out.
Yeah, that way, nothing, no masala will reach the end.
Did you see how we went from should designers code to actually all the no code solutions that are coming out, basically? Full of it's like, should designers code? No, actually, you know what? Never mind. Let's just not code at all.
And there was a tweet. Should designers no code?
Oh my God.
Basically.
But it's interesting, even in Webflow, though, you need some background to understand, to use it properly. If you have some basics of how if loops work, how database structures work, it becomes easier. Correct me if I'm wrong.
For sure.
That is actually good, right? Like, for example, how would you structure your database is a very fundamental problem that has nothing to do with code. Like, code is a medium to access the database and sort of act on it. But if you have the right kind of thinking, you as a designer should also be able to design a great database that allows you to build certain features, right? And I think that's the kind of thing Abhinav was talking about, right? There is design in all functions, right? Even like the way your database is structured, for example, or the way your APIs are designed. It's actually called designing APIs, right? And
database design.
DevX is whole companies working on it. So I think these kinds of tools make it more accessible to us to put that thinking into places where it earlier was not accessible to us. And hence we are seeing people doing all kinds of crazy things with these tools that they were not able to do before, right?
Right, for sure. And coming to our next question is, what's a senior designer versus what's a super duper senior designer? So that title is open to interpretation. But we'll start with what do we mean senior designer? Like, the word is thrown around. So Abhinav, what do you think? What do we mean senior designer?
I saw this tweet recently where I think it was the founder of UNO. I think the tweet was, this guy replied to this tweet, which was somebody had made this rant about, they're like, oh dude, like, I'm shaking my head. Like, this product manager in my PRD said that I have to improve customer experience and retention, and that's it, right? And she's like, oh, this is so dumb. Like, why do PMs do this? And his reply was, wait, like, that's what a senior designer is actually supposed to do. I would prefer you tell me to do that rather than tell me do exactly this.
Right.
And what that comes down to me is dealing with ambiguity, right? Which is any design process, like I view it as a inverted triangle, where when you start off, you have so many things going on and you have no idea which direction it's going to take. And then as you develop clarity, you go towards a solution and finally you reach something which, after all these inputs considered, you've designed something that works really well. I think the difference between a junior and senior designer technically is just that depth, which is how well do you deal with ambiguity. For example, as a junior designer, you might think the triangle ends here, which is, let's say, you have screens, you have how they animate, and then maybe how the screens connect to each other. Or you have a few things and you think, okay, like it caps up over here. Versus then you realize there's another layer to it, which is maybe I need to figure out what are the business goals for this, right? Or let's say you have a team that you're managing, you have to then figure out, okay, who is best suited to do this particular thing? And then the number of inputs that you have to work with, the amount of ambiguity keeps changing. So I think a senior designer is just one who has some amount of experience or understanding of what these different ambiguities are and can work with them in the best way possible. And junior designers typically might not know how deep that ocean is. They're just maybe looking at the ocean floor, but then they realize that over time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Arjun, what's up?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I mean, I love that analogy of the triangle, right? The pyramid structure. Like, actually, for me, a junior designer is basically just running on adrenaline and enthusiasm, right? And like the ideal junior designer you want, right? Is just someone who's like on like full rush about like wanting to just do more, right? I think that's what like would eventually get them into the world of getting to want to know more, right? And then like the pyramid which Abhinav spoke about, like that's the way that outlook towards that approach towards things will eventually get them to know more and more about the pyramid, and like as they progress, as they go into more senior roles, that's when the problem solving starts kicking in. But then all this is going to come from an outlook of enthusiasm and passion, right? So the ideal junior designer who we are all like scouting for, I guess, is that person with like ultra crazy enthusiasm, I guess. Like for me, that's like the, and because that once that enthusiasm is there, it's always going to be there, right? Until and unless something ridiculously happens in terms of shipping, right?
Duper senior designer. What's a senior designer, Hardik? What's your take on that?
I have a serious take and a hot take.
Uh-huh. We are here for the hot takes.
I'll go with the hot take first, right? I think a junior designer is like very much like Dunzo, where he or she is just waiting to be told what needs to be done, and they'll just go and run the task. Senior designer is like an Ola driver who would tell you, do you really need to go there, right? Like, why are you taking me on the ride, right? They'll ask like very fundamental questions, right? And then at the end they'll say, I'm canceling the ride because I don't want to be a part of this journey, basically. Anyway, yeah, I think as Abhinav said, right, the junior design is basically the function is very linear and sequential, right? Like you sort of wait for input from the previous stakeholder, or let's say the overarching bigger stakeholder, and you execute. But as you sort of grow more senior, like the roles start to like sort of become vertical, where you are actually parallelly standing with them and supporting basically the entire function, right? Which means not only are you required to come up with a solution, but you're also required to trade the ambiguity and also solidify the problem, right? What is the job of a product manager? Basically, this is the goal we're trying to achieve. What product would achieve that goal? Can you define that product? Defining the product is usually done by product managers in case when they are accompanied by a junior designer, but a senior designer comes on board, they would actually partner and together they would decide what product would achieve that goal. So you sort of become more vertical and like start supporting the organization, supporting the product instead of just executing the product. So as when you start supporting the product, that's when you truly become a stakeholder. Otherwise, I mean, in the earlier days, like when you sort of are a junior designer, you're just basically making your work do the talking and like keeping the wheels going, right? Like you're just executing and keeping things in motion. But as you go up, you're starting to support more than what you were doing earlier, right? So and supporting comes in many ways, right? Like creating a great organization, as Abhinav had done in an academy, right? Like basically. In Google, there's like a great saying, right? Like great leaders don't design products; they design organizations that design great products. Because organization design is the problem that if solved well, would reflect in the products eventually, right? So it's very meta that way, but that is kind of what the role starts to look like as you grow more senior.
Right. Madhuri, what's your take on that?
I believe seniority is not in the terms of years or the number of time you've spent in the field. It is actually the accountability you have towards the idea at the center. And it doesn't matter if you're 2 years old or if you have 8 years old, as long as you drive your team or you drive yourself to make sure all stakeholders keep the idea at the center, which is the product or the business or the actual problem that you're solving. That is seniority according to me. And that means that if I have to communicate to my stakeholders, I'll do that. If I need to make sure that I have we have a funny way of saying it at Experian. If I have to sing to the cow, I will sing. If I have to dance to the cow, I will dance. So that work gets done. Because that's the accountability I carry. And the more the accountability I carry, it is much more, the seniority increases on its own. That's how I see it. And I think I should be proven wrong because I have seen many instances of it as well. Yeah.
Right. I think, just picking on some of the threads all over the place, all of us seem to agree on, it's about the ambiguity or ability to deal with problem statements or even figure out what needs to be done and get it done. All of those aspects matter. And I think another critical thing that I have felt over the years is first thing, that one of the key aspects that I definitely feel is ability to disengage and stop associating your work with your self-worth. That becomes a very important part of sort of coming into the industry, right? Like I see designers struggling day in, day out. Then you're not able to take feedback. You're not able to, progress. You're not able to discover the crazy new ideas. And another important aspect I think about it is like we was already touched upon, was business awareness, right? Or whatever organization employs it, could be an NGO as well. But the awareness of what is the overall end goal, how this small piece fits into the bigger puzzle, you're able to sort of draw out that path. And I think third is honesty for me. Like you start being more honest about your own work with yourself. Like you start discovering the limitations. You become more vocal about that. This is where it's going to fail, right? This was not designed for this. I have not covered all the things. So that honesty sort of takes a reverse course where when I was like just starting out, I would defend everything. No, but this will do this as well, this as well, this as well. And over the years, it's about like, no, it will just do this one thing and one thing only. And there's no guarantee of it working for anything else. You learn the limitations of your work as well. That's part of being senior as well, at least for me. Anybody got like anything they agree or disagree with?
For sure, dude. For sure. I agree with all those points.
I agree with the honesty part.
It's almost like
not honest with ourselves. Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying I agree with the honesty part because there have been times where I have to be brutally honest with myself or somebody is brutally honest with me, which is worse. So I'd rather be brutally honest with myself.
For sure. What were you saying, Arjun?
So well put. Yeah, it's true, right? Like, I think all of us struggled with like taking critique very badly and seriously, right? Right from like how the setups were set up in college, like the whole concept of juries, to then in the industry, like when you see people from non-design backgrounds also weighing in on this, like I used to take critique very badly. I still remember this. Hardik knows this very well, right? Like he's seen me take critique very, very badly to a point where it was crazy. But yeah, like this is like spot on. What Madhuri said was spot on about this.
Right. And this brings us to as you grow, eventually you do reach a fork in the industry where after so many years of being senior designer, you either have to pick between a managerial side of things, or you have to pick between IC leadership roles, right? And so just generally, what are your opinions on like personally, what did that choice look like for you, or did you encounter that yet? And what are your thoughts generally about those two choices?
I think I would say there are actually three parts. There is the lead design. There's you as an individual contributor. There's a design manager, and the third is you drop out of both of these. But you try to do a third thing, which is like for a lot of people, that third thing could be let me do product management. That third thing could be let me just do my own thing, which is
Right.
I've been building products for so many people. Why can't I just do that by myself? Or the third thing could just be a different role where design is maybe not the main thing, but design is definitely your unfair advantage at that thing. But getting to the question, which is between these two paths, personally, I feel that most people that I've spoken to are very apprehensive about moving to a design manager role because they feel that they're not ready for it. But personally, the way I actually moved into design management was I was just like, yeah, I mean, how hard could it be? And I'm going to figure it out because I had by that point. So to give you some background, I was managing a team when I was building Listen, for example. So at Housing, for example, I was part of a team. At Listen, I was managing a team, which was developers. And then when I joined Unacademy, they were like, yeah, what do you want to do? I was like, okay, let's do design. So then I started building out the team, and it was more about you've managed people before, you've had an opportunity to see an overall picture, and that should prepare you technically to do it. So to most people who think about design managers, the design manager role versus the IC role, I would say you should actually just jump into design management whenever you get the chance, if that's an interest that you have, because nobody is really ready for it. You figure it out on the job. Of course, there's a lot you can read. There is advice that you can get, but the best way to do it is to actually just do it, right? And the most, I think the most, one good way to get into it without too much of risk as well is that managing just one or two people can be a good sort of, I think, training exercise to get your basics right, which is, how often should I check up on people? How often should I give my feedback versus let them figure it out? What are the points where I should interject, or should I let them pick their own battles, right? A lot of these things are basics that you figure out irrespective of how many people you're working with. So and once you have these basics, then scaling up is just a matter of how many more people can I do this for, and how many things do I have going on that I can give my attention to. Yeah, personally, that's my opinion around this.
And just before we move on, I just want to throw a follow-up question, which is, I mean, feel free to refuse to answer it as well. Do we really need like design managers? Like, weren't product managers supposed to be the design managers?
I think the tricky part about that is product managers, see, at least in let's say Silicon Valley, for example, from what I've heard, PM interviews, you actually have a design interview where you have to actually solve design problems. You actually have a dev interview where you have to actually solve dev problems, like you have whiteboarding and stuff. But in India, like, I feel like a lot of PMs aren't expected to do design because I feel like I'm maybe generalizing here, but most companies, their first few PMs are usually people managers, and then they get deeper into product. Versus, I'm not sure how that is in the US. Maybe it's similar. But I feel like that's one of the reasons why you need somebody who speaks the language of design, which is not just for the designers on your team, but for the overall company as well. So, for example, now that I've been at Unacademy, people know what the dictionary of terms is. For example, how do you talk about design, right? If you didn't have the dictionary, you wouldn't be able to talk about nuanced things in design. And that dictionary usually is built up in a team when you have designers who've done it before at a different place. So, and then once that happens as a product manager, you have the dictionary, you can do that same thing to the other people you work with.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Arjun, what's your take on IC role versus managerial roles and the options?
So the way Abhinav spoke about it, it kind of triggered something else entirely for me. My entire premise so far has been around, growing as an IC, and I think what has really helped me is the fact that I had the ideal mentors at the right points of time, right? So I had a very good mentor who understood what strengths I bring into a process when I was at Ola, and then in Swiggy I have a mentor who basically understood what kind of strengths I bring to the organization. So it's just the scale of it increased when I moved into Swiggy, right? So in both scenarios, like what I understood over time is that when you're an individual contributor and when you're a design manager, so it comes down to a people skill where in one side you're looking at mentorship and in the other side you're looking at collaboration, right? You still have an eye on the output, but an individual contributor is still going to be a very, very key important person in terms of people management, right? They're still going to be fighting battles in terms of collaboration and getting things together, right? And versus a design manager is doing the same, is fighting the same battles with different variables, right? They have to look at the people quotient and the mentorship quotient, right? So I think that's where my stance is with regards to individual and design manager. I've been in a place for a long time where this is a big problem in the Indian mindset, right? That growth means ek din manager banna chahiye. Right? That's the thought process which is kind of drilled into us. And I'm so glad that we are now in fairly unorthodox setups where this is not like forced and drilled down anymore, right? So I know people who have like chartered very good careers for themselves as individual contributors as well as managers, and I've seen managers who have become very, very strong evangelizers within the organization, right? So, and I think you need both these sort of mixes, especially in design, right, to kind of look at companies seeing the product and seeing the outputs of when you put these sort of people into the mix. That eventually, I mean, few years ago, design was a product function. Today, design is a vertical on its own, like how Abhinav and Hardik and Madhuri have spoken about already. We are now a vertical on our own, and this has happened because of both collaboration, ability to collaborate, and ability to mentor, right? So that's my stance now at this point of time with regards to individual contribution and management.
Makes sense. Hardik, what's your take on that?
I think to build on what Abhinav initially mentioned about managing, right? Like I think as a designer, you are already managing the stakeholders, right? And managing people around you because you all sort of work in the same product and problems. It's just that with management as a function, it brings a responsibility to it. So you're managing other people, even as a normal IC designer, you're just not responsible for their work directly. But as you become a design manager, you have people who you're responsible for, and to make sure like they deliver good work as well, and they also grow. So it's almost like the organization needs to benefit from their work, and they need to benefit back from the organization. So you are the one making sure of both of those functions, right? And the other way to look, so there are a lot of similarities with being a parent, right? Like you're sort of directly responsible to ensure that they are growing, but you're also making sure that they are producing great quality work, right? Like the growth and their growth and the company growth sort of go hand in hand. And good managers do ensure that. I think I probably right now work at a company that has the highest level of hierarchy probably anywhere in the world, right? So here, that's something that I've noticed. And the other thing is the role of a manager is becoming a great curator of the work of their team, right? So they're not gatekeepers, they are curators. So they actually, by being a great curator, they impart their knowledge of taste and their sort of their variables of taste onto their team, right? So if a manager has a great taste, they sort of impart that to the team, and the team ends up also starting to see things at a different level than they used to see. So it's almost like job is to impart that taste onto your designers, and to teach them how to develop their own taste, right? So how to develop their own curation algorithm, because we all start out as great creators, right? We all love to create, we all jump to tools, but developing the curation eye is what sort of makes you truly evaluate great ideas. So I think as a manager, you can be that curator to your creator team, and then end up ensuring that the better outcome is what sort of leaves the filter, not everything that the team creates, right? So you be that kind of a curator, and help the team see those things that you are able to see, right? That made you grow.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Madhuri, what's your take on that?
I'm actually in the training ground right now. And it's one or two people I'm just working with. I work in an organization that's high and center is design. That's it. That like it's completely centered on design. Yeah. And one of those lucky few people where everything comes back to design and we keep questioning, but we also know that everything is kind of like problem solving. So the idea at the center is very solid. And when that comes to it, the only principle that I'm now learning very strongly is get out of the way. Get out of it. Right? Because you end up thinking that this is the thing that you need, but you often blind yourselves from that. So managerial role versus IC role. So far I was an IC. Now I'm training. I have deep appreciation for my managers. So you kind of okay, now you try to understand the pain that you have put somebody else through. So you kind of learn from that, you pick up, go forward and get out of the way of the people that you're trying to manage, so that they can perform better and hopefully be inspired from you one day. So you fall in love with them, but they may not fall in love with you. That's absolutely fine. So that is something that I'm still learning, and hopefully it's working out. Let's see. Depends on who I'm talking about with that. You know who I am.
Yeah. I was trying to address the other question that you asked, right? Like, do we really need managers?
Yes.
If we do or don't need managers depends on the individual person, right? Many times the amount of managing a person needs is very different. I have seen people who are able to take responsibility on their own, frame really complex problems and break them down into achievable chunks and just run the show on their own. They are the people who probably need the least managing. It's basically, they are the best people to manage, honestly, as a manager, right? Yes. That just allows you to do more stuff, right? And you don't have to worry about them all day long. But then there are people who are figuring things out, who are not the same kinds of communicators as the other people, right? Like there is a lot that goes into being a designer. For example, I've seen many people who have never run a stakeholder meeting, where they have never presented a work before to a team of more than 5-6 people. They come with questions like, how do I approach this, right? Like, I am really scared. What kind of questions can I expect? What kind of boxes do I need to tick in order to ensure that there is minimal pushback? That is like a role of a manager, of painting a picture of what it's like to present your work and to take your work to somebody else, right? And those things, that is something you can do for people that need it done for them. But then there are also other people who probably already have done this before and actually know the drill, right? And they just take it up on themselves and go and do it. So there's like both kinds of people. And it is very true that there are designers out there who don't need managers. They're able to just be good at the craft by themselves, as well as running the organization. Not just good at the craft, but also running the organization.
I'd like to add to that, actually. Many times people realize that, so as Arjun added, we are all trained to think that becoming the manager is the thing, that colonial hangover is still there within us. And when we kind of understand that and undo that learning, we realize that management is a skill and being an IC is a skill. And both need to be honed depending on context. In some projects, as Hardik mentioned, if you're giving the project accountability fully, you will be the IC for that and you'll be taken care. But there are some projects you have to work with somebody. So I think going forward, the roles will kind of intermingle, and it is expected that people perform in a team at the same time perform on themselves. So that is something to look forward to. I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. Maybe companies will say, I don't need managers. Maybe companies will say, I need people who pretend to be managers. We don't know.
We need like really good IC, really successful IC role models who have actually charted senior like careers at the highest echelons, right? And it's something that we don't see often, and that subconsciously biases our thinking into believing that actually being a manager is the only way to grow senior and have more responsibility and oversight. I think that's not the case, right? And in Google, there are so many ICs who are extremely senior, right? Like, and they just have never wanted to take up managing other people, right? They just are fine by themselves. They're doing great, and they are working at a level that justifies, that sort of rewards their past work and seniority. So it's absolutely possible to create a great IC career, for sure.
Right. And just consolidating on those points, I think brilliantly put that colonial hangover of that title and all that is completely dying. And another interesting thing that I'm observing that, which was touched upon a lot of time, that as designer, people management is a skill you will need anyway. You will need to manage stakeholders. Communication is a skill you will need anyway. Over communication is a skill you will develop anyway. And sort of that merging of that line. However, one of the important aspects of where I still see a value of, let's say, just pure management is a lot of coaching, mentoring, and managing upwards, right? Which is can be very distracting, on the ground, because managing upward after a point can become like a whole sort of deal. But that does bring us to the next question of the talking about these aspects like mentoring each other, in a team, collaborating with each other, making each other accountable. And I really want to touch upon what do you folks think about the role of mentoring as a designer in the team today, especially if you're a senior designer or lead IC role or something like that. And what is also the role of design evangelism, right? These two aspects I want to touch upon. So Abhinav, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I think I liked Hartik's point about how a good design manager is also a curator, where you're imparting taste in a sense, which is, I feel like that kind of taste is usually the alignment that the team needs. For example, if you as a team can all agree that this is good design, like that is super valuable, because without that, you would not be able to get to decisions as fast as you would be otherwise. Developing that common taste as a team is usually what binds the team together. So I feel like that is a very strong part of mentorship, which is you are sort of, as a mentor, you're giving them eyes to see things. Like when you look at something, there are different lenses through which you can look at things, right? You can look at it from a visual design lens. You can look at it from a business lens. You can look at it from a lot of different lenses that as a junior designer, you might not even know exist. So showing these lenses to your team, that is like a big part of mentorship. So that's the analogy that I would use for mentorship. Of course, there's a lot of process stuff as well. For example, how to do certain things, or training in a sense that when you go through a set of experiences together, the next time a similar experience happens, you know what to do. You know what's the best type of solution to it. It's like that, doing it together as a team, that's the collective experience that mentorship is all about. Second part about design evangelism, I would say the way I look at evangelism is simply this, right? Design as an industry, it's heavily based on proof of work, right? And what I mean by that is that you being a designer with 1 year of experience versus 3 years of experience, it's not immediately clear who's going to be the better designer. That one designer could have gone through a crazy number of experiences, had a really good mentor, really good projects, and be way above somebody who's done 3 years of sort of lukewarm stuff, let's say, right? So proof of work is a very important part of this, which is why like Dribble, for example, was meant to be proof of work, but now it's just proof of outcome, which is, this is what my outcome was in the end. Even when hiring, that's what we're judging for. We're judging for proof of work, which is, have you done these kind of problems in these kind of situations before? But the thing that not many people realize, it goes the other way around as well, which is, as a company, it's not enough for you to say, I am hiring designers and designers would apply, right? A lot of startup founders that I speak to have this problem, and they're like, why is it so hard to hire designers compared to these other roles? And the fact is that they don't know what proof of work for design looks like. So, for example, let's say Swiggy puts out a lot of good case studies, or the designers there are excited about their work enough to talk about it. That's their proof of work that signals to other designers out there that, hey, this is a good place for you to grow. And bigger companies typically don't have this problem. Like Google, everybody knows at some level that they have good design. But the tricky part is, how do you build that from the start? As a small startup, medium-sized startup, getting into a big company. So that's what design evangelism is about on both sides.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Arjun, what does that mean for you?
That was perfectly put here. Like, I mean, the value of mentorship, right? I'm actually in a very cozy place where, like, I can take mentorship for granted now, right? It's like Wi-Fi for me, right? It's just like, it's when it's not there that it hits. So, and I've been exposed to different types of mentorship, and what I've realized is, like, a lot of mentorship is about alignment, right? Is about bringing people to, think a certain way, like, maintain a certain wavelength. And after that, the evangelizing and the actions, everything, they just happen on their own, I guess, right? I realized, like, looking back, there were scenarios where my mentor just basically, put me into the problem space, right? And basically say, you know what, go fight it out. If you need something, I'm around. You can just let me know. Then there are also scenarios where my mentor has spent a lot of time, right, with me earlier on in the problem, and after that has not had to worry about how that materializes. Because that's when I realized that at all that timeshare and mindshare which I was exposed to was essentially to bring me to a certain wavelength of thought process, wherein my actions would eventually start, leading towards what that problem needed at that point of time. So that's the kind of mentorship I was exposed to, right? So, and eventually, hopefully, at one point of time, that's how I look at collaboration as well, right? From an organization standpoint, this is what we all spend. Like, this is something which we are very lucky to see now in the Indian space, that companies now want to look outward within themselves, right? Product managers are not necessary. They've understood that they need enough and more insight about design, but they don't even need to know design, but they need enough insight to appreciate the process and factor that in terms of how they build. And that's true for business, that's true for technology, everyone. So now everyone is spending a lot more time on alignment earlier on, right? So it's about that understanding the value of time being invested. And even after that, it's just about how everyone just disbands and is able to actuate these problems in their own way. So that's what I've been noticing over the last few years, especially, and bringing the whole product manager aspect into this as well, right? I have seen that change, right? Earlier on, product managers were all about, feasibility and shipping and execution. Now they're all about roadmaps and visioning, right? And that's happened for designers as well now, because we work in such close proximity with them. So we are technically being mentored to mentor other products now. So
right, very interesting take. And that's a very interesting part about wavelength and alignment. And I remember you speaking about in the interview as well. And I've always found that an interesting aspect, and definitely, like, I can imagine what you're talking about when you get alignment, the evangelism and mentoring part. Like with mentoring part, the evangelism starts to happen naturally. Sure. Hardik, what's your take on that evangelism and mentoring?
I think for mentorship, it's a lot about basically imparting a lot of mental models onto your mentee, right? Instead of telling them what's right and wrong or showing them what's good and bad, basically helping them arrive at that solution on their own. Right? So it's initially you start with a lot of handholding, but ideally in a mentorship you should have to do less and less handholding to help them reach at better outcomes, right? And it's all about like. And you can basically see that, right? Like drawing another parallel to like parenting, basically how you teach your kid is not to give them the answer but to tell them how to arrive at the answer, right? And that's good parenting, right? Because then you are actually forcing them to think and forcing them to think about the repercussions of if they take a certain path, what would be the outcome. If they take a different path, what would be the outcome, right? And then you teach them to evaluate. I think evaluation is basically the core skill a designer should have, and design mentor should have. Design mentors should basically make their mentees aware of like how to be great evaluators, right? Not just, and it's a life skill also, right? It's like you should be able to judge and evaluate like any situation and any outcome, comparing apples to apples, right? So that's what I think a role of a mentor is. And you could like sort of abstract out a role of a manager from a role of a mentor in a as a parallel as well, right? But doesn't need to be a manager. I think you could even learn these things from somebody who's not directly responsible for you. Right. About evangelism, I think we've seen like great success in companies that have done this well, right? It's basically being a flag bearer for how they think. And I think that's very difficult to put out, right? How an organization thinks is a very difficult problem to actually articulate and share out in a quick and sort of easily consumable way. Mm-hmm. But now we are seeing a lot of these companies doing a .design or a /design web page and sharing out how they look at how basically they think about product design and what role design plays in their organization. So if you don't do that, then it's very hard to judge from the outside, and it then like reflects in your hiring as well, right? Why do companies who complain hiring designers is tough find it tough? Because of them not, it's like you have to do the work, you have to meet the good designers halfway, right? Show me why I should come to you as much as I am telling you why I want to join you, right? So if they meet halfway, like, hey, this is the environment we have created for you to succeed. Do you want to succeed with us? That's basically evangelism, right? Like you put yourself out there because good candidates are hiring you as a company as much as you are hiring the good candidates, right? So if the matching doesn't happen, which doesn't, right? In most cases, why is it hard to hire senior designers? Because senior designers have demands. Senior designers have a good taste also in the organization that they pick, right? They are not going to jump at any available opportunity, right? They have a taste, and they want to basically they're looking for better things to work on, right? So if you tell them that you have better things to work on by evangelizing how you think and how you're planning to solve the problem for the next 10, 15, 20 years to come, then there is a potential match. So I think evangelism is now starting to become more important, and I love that more companies are seeing it that way, right? And bigger companies always did this as like being the biggest recruiters in the market, but now smaller companies are having to compete with them, and hence are having to catch up and sort of come to the fore with like all the additional work that goes into it.
Yeah, Madhuri, what's your take on that?
With the mentorship, actually, I have had a very, how do you say, rosy life with mentorship, because it started with 8 years long mentorship with Karthi. And she's the reason why I'm in design, and it's still continuing. So that means we're not bored of each other, or there's a lot more of it. And for me, I see mentorship as a willingness from both sides. There's tolerance is one level, but willingness to actually see both sides to improve and grow together. Because in a team like mine and a different ethos like ours, it has to be built a certain way. And that's where the alignment comes in. And she puts it so well. It's like mentorship is like the willingness to sculpt that person, even though it is painful, it is okay. And you're willing to go through that sculpting because somewhere it will emerge out really well, because it takes time, right? Even if it's broken, you have to restart from first and all of those things. And that has been a beautiful experience for me. Of course, I've had my ups and downs, and we all know how horrible sometimes one-to-ones can be, and it just makes us feel like, okay, I don't think I should do this anymore, that kind of stuff. But it's been the most beautiful journey for me. It's like the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm very thankful for that. Coming to evangelism, it is 100% spot on what Hardik said. We have to be on alignment. And if we are not in alignment, then we can't speak one unified language. So it's like the human to human interaction, just like we do the human machine interaction. The human to human interaction, we have the same semantics, we have the same language, we have the same dictionary, as Abhinav mentioned. If we have all of that in one place, then it's much more easier for us to amplify our voice and evangelize it with all our teams. Like a product team speaks the same language, the marketing team speaks the same language, the sales team speaks the same language. Getting sales to speak is another story, but they're kind of like, you're aligned and you're like, okay, let me get this done. And we're all coming in and saying yes. Even though we say disagree to commit, we are saying yes to do it. And that is something exciting for me, because the time spent on evangelism is reducing, because there are good case studies out there. And we should keep contributing more, so that our job as 80% communication reduces to 80%, should come down to 20%. Really, it should do, so that we can go and focus and do other stuff. That's what I think about evangelism.
Awesome, makes sense. And just adding, from giving lenses to mental models to alignment and managing up and down, and it's clear that value of evangelism to get the pipeline running to even be able to hire designers. The best designers are not the kind of designers most companies and startups are looking for, are not floating around their resumes. So it's becomes impossible to hire without evangelism and retain without mentorship. You may hire them without a mentor, what you're going to do? Because there's countless startups who will first, like Abhinav said, will struggle to hire designers, and then there are some those who manage to hire, and then designers leave fast because there was no mentorship and no one to guide that process. And that brings us to we have overshot our target time by a little bit. Roughly it's 1 hour, but for closing, there's an open question thrown to anybody who wants to pick this up, but this is generally about the community. What do you think we do as a design community and designers these days that we should do more of? I always wanted to try, and I wanted to ask you folks if this makes sense. I think all of us have met in person, and my favorite intro line is like, "You live." What do you think that as a starter line?
I missed that completely. Sorry.
What's the line, dude?
Hello? What the line is, "You live." That's it. Like, you live.
You live, you mean?
No, you live. Like, never mind. I think I got it. It's flat. It's flat.
Okay.
It's flat.
This is going great, guys.
My brain is still like at silver.
I was waiting for the punchline, dude.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. So the